viewers, let us discuss the topic polity and administration in ancient India. The ideas on statecraft and administration was not unknown to ancient rulers. In fact, ancient Indian administrative system has evolved over a period of systematic application of various principles of efficient and effective administrative mechanism. The ideas of good governance, which is considered to be a post-90s phenomena, was also a popular principle behind statecraft and administration. In today's lecture, we will try to understand and examine the nature of polity and the administrative principles enunciated in the different texts. Now, the concept of polity and administration was envisaged through different ideas as well as principles. A number of words was used to describe ancient Indian administrative system. They were Raj Dharma, Raj Shastra, Dandaniti, Niti Shastra, and so on and so forth. These ideas replicated modern principles of governance. In other words, ancient Indian political ideas focused on core principles of statecraft and administration. This particular lecture is divided into three broad areas. We will start off with the key texts from which we can derive those political principles. Then we'll try to understand the different and specific political administrative principles which were popular in ancient India. And finally, we'll try to understand whether these principles led to good governance or they were just mere administrative principles. Now, the concept of politics was also not unknown to the ancient rulers. Politics was supposed to be the basis of all activities in the state. In ancient times, there was a very powerful principle that the purpose of the state was protection of the weak and promotion of law and order. If these principles were not fulfilled, then the state would be a state of Matsanaya, where the rule of the big fish eating into the smaller ones would become popular. In other words, there was numerous principles in the governance of welfare and state administration in ancient India. Let us take a glimpse into a number of texts which were very popular in terms of providing ideas on state welfare and administration. Some of the important texts which enunciated political principles were the Vedas, the Dharma Shastras, epic literature which comprises the Ramayana and Mahabharata, Arthashastra, Manusmriti or Manav Dharma Shastra as it is called, the Buddhist and Jain writings, Sukraniti, Brihaspati Sutra and Kural of Thiruvalluvar. Now, at the outset, we need to understand that though the Vedas were essentially ritualistic scriptures, yet they also contained certain implicit political principles in terms of ideas of the Raja as the head of the state and in ideas such as Sabha and Samitis as popular assemblies. However, core political principles can be found in the most rigorous Arthashastra, Manusmriti as well as in the Shanti Parva and Anushasana Parva of the Mahabharata. We need to understand that Jain writings, though they were highly spiritual in terms of replication of ideas, yet they were not non-political. They consisted of principles and ideas governing a welfare state. Along similar lines, Shukraniti and Brihaspati Sutra also are considered to be two important works which provide for various principles of state welfare, proportionate justice system as well as proper measures for keeping the people under check. This is also does not mean that though we hear of kings as heads of state, other forms of governments were not there. We should also not lose sight of the fact that though monarchy was the most popular form of government, yet we also hear about republics or provincial governments in ancient India. Let us now focus on different principles of administration as was made popular in ancient India. In order to understand the nature of polity and administration, the first text that gives us an detailed information about administrative mechanism is Kautilya's Arthashastra. The Arthashastra is considered to be a comprehensive text which focuses not just on the elements of the state as encapsulated in the Saptang theory, but also focuses on principles of Dandniti, diplomacy, interwar relationships, as well as international relations. Arthashastra is also considered to be a compendium of good governance as it speaks about principles of transparency and accountability in administration. If you look into the Saptang theory of the state, you will find ideas like the state comprising of 7 major elements in the form of Swami, who is the king, Amatya, who refers to the cadre of civil services, Janpad, which refers to territory and population, Durga, which system of fortresses, Kosh, which refers to full-fledged treasury, Danda, which refers to an institution of punishment as well as the armed forces, and finally a system of alliances in the form of a mitra. The 7 elements form the 7 arms of the government, and each of them have a very important role to play in the administration of the country. Along similar lines, the Shanti Parva of the Mahabharata and the Anushasana Parva of the Mahabharata also speak about different principles of administration. For example, the Shanti Parva of the Mahabharata speaks about the duties of the king during normal times as well as during times of disaster. In other words, the model principles of crisis management or disaster management can be found in the Shanti Parva of the Mahabharata. The text also goes at length to detail out the specific functions of the king encapsulated in the term the Raj Dharma. Apart from Arthashastra and Mahabharata, Manusmriti also dwells at length on the powers and functions of the king, the specific roles and responsibilities of the Council of Ministers, the power of the bureaucrats and civil servants, as well as the importance given to public opinion in dissemination of knowledge. In other words, the concept of public opinion, so important in modern democracy, can be found as a tool of responsive, transparent governance in ancient India. Another important text which bears important principles of administration is the Brihaspati Sutra, which concerns with a number of principles or sutras as it is called for good governance. Most important is the concept of welfare of all, the concept of proportionate justice, and the task of the ruler to act as the guardian of the people. Let us now take a detailed look into the specific principles of administration. We would start off with the first principle of administration, which was the principle of authority. It is said to be the basis of all obedience and discipline towards the king. The principle believes that the people of all the 4 castes, as the Varna system was very popular, should keep to their occupations and duties when the king guides them with due authority. The principle of authority in public administration also entails that authority should be obeyed by the people on account of a series of sanctions backed by severe punishment. So it was the fear of punishment which entails that the authority should be obeyed by all. There was another very important principle of public administration, that was the principle of unity of command. Unity of command and direction is maintained because of the king's authority. The king was the sole implementer and executor of all important policy decisions. This is not merely for the purpose of the security of the king, but also for the purpose of maintaining integrity and stability of administration against internal dissension as well as external aggression. Thus, it was important to ensure that the king's authority was respected by all, because that would help the king to maintain internal order and prevent external dissensions. Kautilya outlines an elaborate administrative system wherein he says that all members of the bureaucracy derive their authority from the king. And the bureaucrats and civil servants would be chosen and recruited after going through a series of tests. Thus, there would be rigorous examinations of the capability of the bureaucrats before they are chosen and selected. Kautilya was very cautious to point out that corruption can seep in within the bureaucrats, and therefore there would be adequate measures of regular transfers, regular inspection of civil servants' offices to ensure that all of them work within their desired boundaries. Now, it is also important to understand that enforcement of orders of the king by sending writs as well as procedures of formally appointing royal writ writers was an important part of governance and administration. As for stability of command, for instance, Kautilya writes in the Arthashastra that though there was a system of hereditary monarchy, which he believes also helps in the continuity of principles of governance. It is interesting to note that hereditary monarchy was justified to ensure stability and continuity in rule and governance. That is the reason why in the Council of Ministers there were two categories of Council of Ministers. One category of Council of Ministers came from hereditary peers or hereditary councillors. Another category of Council of Ministers would be those recruited or chosen for their special capabilities and abilities. Thus, the administrative mechanism would be extremely efficient in the sense that they would have a beautiful and harmonious mixture of hereditary councillors as well as those recruited through proper examination. The third principle of administration was the principle of motivation. Arthashastra identifies four different methods of motivation. They are Sama, Dama, Danda and Bhed. Sama is the persuasion method, Dama is the incentive method, Bhed is internal competition, and Danda is the method of dispensing punishment. It was realized and accepted by ancient kings that there should be a system of monetary rewards for capable and efficient bureaucrats. At the same time, there would be a fear of punishment which prevents them from embarking upon the path of corruption and inefficiency. The bureaucrats can be enthused only by one of these methods or a mixture of these methods called Sama, Dama, Danda and Bhed. Government servants will also be entrusted with a sense of responsibility towards the people. The state would motivate them with adequate salary, pension and permanent service. He underlines a series of qualities for officers holding different positions of authority. Kautilya also identified 5 principles of good administration: appropriate means to start undertakings, the excellence of men and materials, allocation of place and time, and provision against failure and accomplishment of work. In other words, these principles of able administrative system entailed a series of ideas and features to ensure that government would serve the needs of the population. Fear, duty and interest are among a number of motives behind the act of obedience to the order of an administrator. The common people either obeyed the rules out of fear or they found it morally just. But obedience to the ruler and the administration was considered to be a priori for the population. Kautilya further believed that good governance was only possible when the administrative system was efficient and effective in delivery of services. Another important area of administration which was highlighted in the different texts was the nature of central administration. For instance, there would be different heads of departments. Kautilya's Arthashastra identifies 18 heads of departments. The major heads of departments included revenue, exchequer, stores, armory, prison, accounts, agriculture, mines, metals, forest, cattle, shipping, commerce, customs, intelligence, religious institutions, excise, weights and measurements. A look into these different departments gives us the feeling that these different departments or ministries were quite similar to what we find in the modern times. In fact, this division of different departments entailed specific functioning of the different departments in the interest of the population. The king was the central executive in this entire administrative machinery. And the ministers were selected by the king on the basis of their qualities, and the ministers were individually responsible to the king. Isn't it interesting to note that the concept of individual responsibility which we have in the current Indian parliamentary system is quite similar to the notion of individual responsibility of the ministers to the king in ancient India? The king, the prime minister, the high priest, and a chosen few form the inner cabinet, where there is a large body which would comprise the council of ministers. So we had an inner cabinet in ancient times also, just like the way we have a cabinet system in modern India's parliamentary system. Just like today we have three categories of council of ministers in contemporary times, in the same way we also had a different system of council of ministers in ancient times. So we can see resemblance and similarity in terms of ancient Indian administrative mechanism with contemporary times. Another distinctive feature of administrative system of ancient India was local administration. Local administration was divided into two parts: rural local administration and urban local administration. We also need to understand that in almost every kingdom and during different reigns, we find that there was a system of decentralized planning and decentralized governmental structure. So much so, right from the times of the Guptas and the Mauryas, we find administration was decentralized in the sense that the village was the basic unit of administration, and the Gramika or the headman was in charge of fulfilling village related duties. It is also mentioned that the concept of Janpad was very popular, which consisted of both the population as well as territory. Janpad was extremely important in terms of taxation and revenue collection. Kautilya highlights the fact that the Janpad should consist of efficient, workable population who would contribute to the king's treasury. The various functionaries at the central, rural and urban level were entrusted with the task of city governance, village governance and block governance. We also need to understand that different administrative principles were also followed in other texts on Indian polity. One major area where all the texts converged were functions of the state. Whether it is the Brihaspati Sutra or the Manusmriti or Mahabharata, one point common area of conjecture was the welfare functions of the state. It was also envisaged in the different functioning of the state that the state had a very limited role to play, and the task of the state was maintenance of law and order, construction of roads, ensuring proper positive measures for the people and overall welfare. However, in course of time, from the Vedic to the post-Vedic period, the functions of the state gradually increased. By the time the Mauryan Empire was established, the state was expected not just to provide law and order, but also to foster dharma and righteousness within the kingdom. It was believed that a just state was one which sponsored and promoted morality and righteousness, encouraged major economic activities, and developed trade and industry, agriculture and cattle rearing. The state was also entrusted with the task of ensuring prosperity within the kingdom. Not just political functions, the state was also entrusted with certain cultural and educational functions. It was the duty of the state to encourage learning of Vedas and to patronize education as well as culture. To relieve the sufferings of the people, the state was expected to construct and maintain rest houses, charitable institutions, hospitals, etc. In short, the state was supposed to cater to the material, spiritual, and aesthetic needs of the people. After studying the nature of administrative system, we come to the next important aspect of polity and administration in ancient India, and that is kingship. There are a number of theories associated with kingship in ancient India. In fact, Buddhist scriptures also speak about the nature of kingship. Two very important theories can be found in the different texts. One was the divine right theory and the other was the social contract theory. The divine right theory popularized the idea that the king was the representative of God on earth, and the king was a symbol of divinity, and therefore the people were accountable and answerable to the king. Nobody had the right to disobey the king. However, Mahabharata goes a step further and gives the people the right to revolt against the king, wherein one section says that the king should be shot like and killed like a mad dog if he transgresses his powers. However, we need to understand that though absolute monarchy was the rule, yet we find that the king did not enjoy unfettered powers and authority. The powers and authority of the king were circumscribed by Rajdharma or the dharma of the people. Under no circumstances he could violate the rights and aspirations of the people. There was another theory which was very popular, which is called the theory of social contract. Aitareya Brahmana is one Hindu text which speaks about the way in which the king was elected. Indra was elected as the king of gods because he was the most valiant, the most popular, and acceptable by all. The social contract theory is also very popular in a Buddhist text called the Digha Nikaya. The Digha Nikaya specifically speaks about the contract between the people and the ruler. The theory goes on as follows. During the initial days of human existence, people led a life of tranquility and peace. Everything belonged to everyone. There was a system of common ownership of property. However, at times passed by, with the growth of population and complexities of life, people started fighting amongst themselves. The concept of mine and thine emerged, and hence people felt the need of a ruler. They gradually entered into a contract amongst themselves by virtue of which they created a ruler. The ruler was entrusted with the task of controlling and maintaining law and order. There was a contract or agreement among the people. The people would be giving a portion of their produce in terms of grains and gold to the ruler. The ruler in return would rule the country and maintain law and order. The Buddhist text Digha Nikaya speaks of the great elect. He was also called the Mahasammata, who was chosen by the people to a contract. The king, as I said, did not enjoy unfettered authority. Just like in modern times, especially in America, the concept of checks and balances is very popular. In the same way, in ancient times, the power of the king was also circumscribed by a system of checks and balances. All the texts on ancient Indian thought focused on the fact that the king should listen to the council of ministers. Public opinion was another important check on the authority of the king. During the Vedic period, the authority of the king was restricted by the popular and semi-popular assemblies. During the later times, though these agencies had disappeared, the king was advised to keep his finger on the pulse of the public feeling and never to offend the public blatantly. Kautilya emphasizes the need for collective deliberations and stresses that the king should follow the advice of his chief advisor on all important issues. The autonomy enjoyed by the various social, cultural, and economic institutions which catered to the interests of the members also restricted the authority of the king. Even the most powerful of all kings could not function in opposition to these institutions. The final check on the authority of the king was the traditional ideals of kingship. According to these ideals, the king was supposed to be the servant of the people, the trustee of their interests. And the king, during his coronation, swore that he would work mentally, physically, and verbally for the welfare of the state, considering always as good whatever is law and whatever is not opposed to policy. Thus, Kautilya declared, in the happiness of the subjects lies the happiness of the king. It is not happiness or welfare of the king, but it is the happiness of the subjects that he is supposed to respect. Next, we move on to councillors and officials and the importance given to them in ancient Indian administration. The king could not perform the multifarious duties assigned to him single-handedly. Therefore, he was dependent on the councillors and officials. Emphasizing the need of assistance of these officials, the Mahabharata says, The king should depend upon the ministers like animals on clouds, Brahmanas on Vedas, and women upon husbands. Kautilya also says that the king should follow his chief minister as a student his teacher, a servant his master. During the Vedic period, the king was assisted by functions known as Ratnins. The prominent Ratnins during the period were the Purohit, the Gramini, the Shangrahita, and the Bhandagarika. During the post-Vedic period, the Ratnins faded away, and their place was taken by ministers who were called as Mantris or Sachivas or Amatyas. During the Mauryan times, the king was assisted by a body of elder statesmen known as Mantri Parishad. The size of this Mantri Parishad varied from 7 to 37. These ministers were chosen by the king with utmost care and advised him on important measures. The council of ministers was not merely a rubber stamp, and his advice carried much weight to the king. Almost all authorities and texts have emphasized that the councillors should speak freely and openly, and that the king should give full consideration to their advice. In the absence of the king, the council exercised tremendous powers. We learn that Ashoka permitted his councillors to take minor decisions even when he was present in the empire. Though the king was free to appoint his own councillors, in reality these positions went by inheritance. The meetings of the councils were held in complete secrecy. The designation and functions of the councillors varied considerably from one kingdom to another kingdom. Certain scholars have suggested that the king deliberated privately with the Purohit before taking the final decision. The councillors and high officials were called as Mahamantras during the pre-Gupta period. Now, it was necessary to ensure that the ministers were people who maintained a righteous life and ensured and followed a code of ethics in their daily living. The officials of the state received salaries in cash. Arthashastra has quoted the specific amounts which will be paid to different officials. However, it had not specified the coin or the period of payment. Most probably, the payment was made in panas, a silver coin, on monthly basis. Another important aspect of administration in ancient India was the existence of a very strong espionage system or spy system. The most detailed account of the organization of the spy system has been provided in Kautilya's Arthashastra and in the Manusmriti. The spies would take the guise of students, ascetics, prostitutes, beggars in order to elicit information from the general people. They were also recruited from the class of astrologers and nuns. They reported on the conduct of both officials and non-officials. Sukranitisara is another text which emphasizes on the importance of the spy system. In fact, there is a quote in the Sukranitisar which says, "A king worthy of praise should always learn his own faults from the subject's point of view and get rid of them, but never punish the people." If we keep this observation in mind, we will find that the criticism leveled against the secret service in India is not unfair. Probably at that time, the government could not work without the efficient spy system. The spies thus performed functions of informing the king whatever was happening not only within the boundaries but what was happening in the adjoining kingdoms. Apart from the spies, the Doot or the messenger was also an important administrative official. He was supposed to carry information to adjoining kingdoms as well as bring information from adjacent kingdoms, because Kautilya emphasized on an international relations and alliances of friendly territories and kingdoms. Another important part of administrative mechanism was the existence of popular assemblies. The most important popular assemblies was the Sabha and the Samiti. The Samiti was the national assembly of the whole people, while the Sabha was probably a standing statutory body of select men. The importance of these Sabha and Samitis was that they provided important advice and consultation in terms of common areas of governance and administration. In course of time, the Sabha and Samiti lost their influence and their places were taken up by bodies known as the Paura and the Janapada. These local assemblies also played an important role in the dispensation of public opinion. Finally, we come to the importance of local self-government. Ancient Indian system focuses on the importance of decentralized governance. The village was the lowest unit of administration, and the headman or the Gramika was the head of the village who was responsible for the total upkeep of the village as well as passing of information to the king regarding the overall maintenance and regulation of the village. His post was usually hereditary. By caste, he was a non-Brahmana. Defense of the village was one of the main functions of the Gramika. Apart from the Gramika, there was a village accountant who was responsible with the task of corresponding with district authorities, central government, ensuring that the records of the village meetings were duly systematically recorded. The Shukraniti refers to other officials such as the Sahasodhipati or the magistrate, the Bhagohara or the revenue collector, or the Sulkagraha or the toll collector, and the Pratihara or the gatekeeper. What can we deduce from today's understanding of ancient Indian administrative system? The different texts point out to a well-developed administrative mechanism in ancient India. Administrative system was based on the principles of good governance, which ensured the greatest good of all. The different principles of administration was encapsulated through the principles of Rajdharma, Dandaniti, and Vyavharapad. Ancient state system was based on the values of welfare coupled with the principles of proportionate justice and a code of ethics in which neither the ruler nor the ruled was outside the purview of dharma, so much so that dharma was the supreme law of governance not only for society but also for polity and administration. Thank you.